Sorry about
Thought
that.
you were back
Oh,
to the
no,
future.
no.
All right, good morning. It is 9 a.m. Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting on Friday, March 15th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Thank you all for joining. We've got a quorum, a couple of folks on Zoom. Purpose of today is discussion of developing a long-range vision and goals for future beach conditions. Tim and Nicole, or Tim, talking about your old boss. Stephen and Nicole have joined us today. Last committee meeting, we talked about defining really what success would look like. What do we want the beach to be, short-term, long-term, aspirational, whichever piece, and just thought it would be nice to have you both here with us today. Nicole, since you're a new player, why don't you just do a quick introduction if you don't mind, because I'm sure not everybody knows you. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. So my name's Nicole Elko. I am here today representing the beach as the beach consultant for the town of Sullivan's Island, and I work with other coastal communities throughout South Carolina on similar beach management issues. I sit over on Folly Beach, so thanks for letting me attend virtually. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And Nicole also is leader of the South Carolina Beach Advocates Group that we're all a part of. So Nicole, thank you for joining, and Stephen, as always. I think if we get you a cot here, that would be good. You wouldn't have to bother with.
He deserves more than a cot at this point.
Oh, good point.
I actually have two upstairs, so really,
Just for the emergency
just
stuff.
for in case.
So I don't know, Douglas or Desiree, any opening comments you want to make before we just Q&A, I guess, or just
Yeah,
let it,
I think that the
let it
goal
flow?
of this conversation is to, again, like you said, start articulating what the overall aspirational vision for the city is, and get the advice from Stephen and people like Nicole Elko about what that looks like, right? I mean, there's going to be it's an aspirational vision that needs to be embedded in practical terms of what we are able to do, what is economically feasible. But I think starting with what is the ideal for our community, what is the right amount of beach, if you will, that we need to have to not only ensure recreational opportunities for the public, but also to serve as, from a mitigation perspective and increasing our resilience to storm impacts and erosional impacts. So I think that's where we left it off last time. I know there's also questions and questions about the particular issue we're having concerns now down at Breach Inlet, and there's all this, conversations about what the solution is for that location. And that's why we asked Nicole to come here, as a representative of Sullivan's. Anything that happens on that inlet, impacts, good or bad, to Sullivan. So I think we wanted to have somebody that represented their interests and can speak to some of the solutions that have been discussed, mentioned, that people are curious about. So I think with that,
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Well, last week we talked about to the vision comment, what we wanted our beach to be. And is there, I'm sure there's not, but is there a definition of like what depth profile constitutes a healthy beach? I mean, or is it by zone, by community, by, type? I mean, is there something that we could reasonably expect to get and keep?
Sure. A lot of times for a particular community, we'll establish what we call an ideal beach profile. And that is a site-specific profile that it's kind of two parts. One part is kind of an engineering or scientific method of evaluating the beach volume. So how much sand do you need per linear foot of beach to have the beach that will withstand the erosion conditions, the storm impacts that you'll have. So that's an analysis that you can do and say, okay, look, we're looking to have a beach that would withstand a Category 3 storm or a return period type storm that will allow for X number of feet of dune recession during that storm and be able to maintain it that way. But there's also kind of the more political or just community feel on what does that community want to see. And what is that community used to? And that really varies among the state. If you go to Edisto Beach, those folks are just used to seeing a very thin, narrow beach. They don't want real big dunes because they want to be able to see the ocean from the bottom floor. So you have to take that into account too. Folks who have had a really wide, overly healthy beach, you go up to like the center part of Litchfield Beach, you know, they've had 3 or 4 rows of dunes for a long time. So that's what, when they lose that outer row of dune during a storm, then they're saying they have critical erosion, even though they still have 3, you know, more rows of dunes. So there's a little bit of, you know, just kind of personality, I'll call it, with that. But what we would do is kind of look at, and we can very easily do this with the data that we have. You establish your kind of your control line, which is generally the line of the structures, saying we want to measure, you know, how much sand we have seaward of all those structures. And then you pick a spot on the beach that everybody kind of agrees this is healthy. You know, this is what we want to see, and if that matches with the scientific, you know, storm impact type analysis, then that's what you use as your ideal beach. So that's kind of the baseline that you want. We want everybody to have that. But then you have to look at the kind of the local conditions too, especially around an inlet where we may want to have this, but it just becomes really impossible to be able to maintain that all the time due to the rapid erosion and accretion patterns we have around inlets. I mean, you can try to achieve that, but if that's like you know, we're going to have this regardless, then you're going to spend a ton of money to try to maintain that at all time. You may have to live with periods where it comes back, you know, still to something that's not critical, but, you know, maybe not be ideal. And then you're working towards that ideal over time, whether naturally or through supplement. Really, when you're designing a beach nourishment project along a straight strand of beach, you have that, we call that the deficit volume, which is the amount of sand you need to get to that ideal condition. And then you have your advanced fill, which is the amount of sand that you need for the design life of the project. So that if you want sand there for 10 years, you have to reach that ideal and then put enough sand out there that 10 years later, it's eroded back to that ideal. It hasn't eroded back to the houses. You know, so you're trying to advance, you know, the shoreline seaward. So there is some nuance to it, but it's certainly an exercise that's worth doing. We do it for a lot of clients just in our reports where people have had to deal with critical erosion. We establish, here's your healthy beach. It works better on the center part of the islands away from inlets, but we can do that for the entire thing. And we can add that in our next, we can at least go through with some examples, and I can do that for either the next meeting or maybe 2 weeks to give you where we're at right now and what some different scenarios would look like with that ideal volume.
Do you have
Thank you.
samples of other communities that you've done that we might be able to kind of get the description's fantastic to me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
it would be
seeing some
great
on
to
papers.
see what one looks like to
Sure.
kind of see how it might apply to the other ponds. And I'm guessing since you're describing it to us, we've not done one here.
Well, we've
haven't
done it in context of like the nourishment projects on the east end. When we're looking at the east end, you can basically you create a chart with, you know, your beach on the x-axis and then your volume on the y-axis, and you'll see a dip, and we'll draw lines. And where anything below that line is
It's your requirement.
is the requirement just to get healthy, and then you add on top of that. So we've done that when we're designing the projects over there, you know, kind of establishing what our deficit volumes are.
So we have project specific
Yeah,
potentially.
but not for the entire island. But we can give you that. We just recently did that for Georgetown County and Litchfield Beach and Garden City. So that'd be a good example.
And do you have various levels
Cindy.
of consulting that you can do as regards to reporting, as in, one of the things we saw in North Carolina, and again, thank you, Tim, was information on the economics of a healthy beach. You know, is that something else that can be looked, I assume everything obviously is time and of a cost, but I'm just curious as to what we can do as regard to plan as we go out and look to the individuals in the community and grants as regards, is there an economic impact to the island overall and our tax base? And I don't know if that's something that you all have worked with people to add to these reports, or whether that's done by other sorts of organization companies.
Yeah, there are people that kind of specialize in that are more on the economic side than the engineering side. But we have looked at projects where you have, and PRT has kind of they have an analysis of just the coastal impact and the impact of beaches on, the tax base and things like that. So you have to make a link between the value of a particular property in an eroded condition as opposed to a value of that same property when they have a healthy beach. So it's a analysis that certainly can be done. But what we've seen at like other beaches where properties can't be sold, when the water's up to a house, nobody's gonna buy that property. When right after a beach project's done, they're getting offers for their property well above what they had asked for, years ago before, the beach was in eroded condition. So there's some work that could be done and it would definitely be a worthwhile effort. But Nicole might have, I know there's a professor at USC that's looked at some of this, but Nicole, do you know of
Yeah.
particular studies? This is a little bit more your world.
Sure, as Stephen mentioned,
That was gonna be good, too. Just hanging on, waiting for the financial. May I ask a question while you're?
Yeah.
So what you said a moment ago sounds pretty parcel-specific. My house, really almost parcel-specific to the front beach properties. But is there an analysis, because, I benefit from a healthy beach, and I live on the backside of the island. So is there community-wide, and then
Yeah.
within that?
Yeah, so you expand out from that. So you would have, you would look at, things like total home sales over maybe a 2-year period when the beach was eroded, and then for a year or two period after, and you can see what those trends in those front beach property values go up. And, when the front beach property values go up, everybody's property values go up. There's also the whole recreational public use aspect that's a little bit more difficult to quantify. And those I know those things have been done. I just can't point to a specific person or study right now.
I bet Nicole could.
Yeah, but are we?
She's got all the
Cindy-
answers.
Cindy, I was, to me, your answer to Cindy's question is part two, because I thought you were asking, I'm assuming once you would identify this ideal beach profile, you could translate that into how much sand is needed over a time period. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one economic piece of this puzzle.
And that's what we would always include when we do kind of a feasibility study or a 30-year plan for a community. It establishes that deficit volume. It establishes your erosion rate and kind of projects how much sand you need to add at what interval. And then you just look at that over the lifespan that you're interested in. 20 or 30 years is really what we found is a realistic planning horizon. And then that gives you your total, long-term cost. So then from there, you can figure out how much you need to set aside each year for that.
And that's completely ignoring anything that Mother Nature attempts to give us. I mean, that's just a set,
Or take.
well,
Well,
good. I don't want to talk about taking, giving. Because, I don't want to sit there, you don't want to sit there watching something creep, year by year closer when you need it in the immediate moment. But that's just like a level set regardless of what might be coming our way otherwise.
Yeah, and that, again, the inlets kind of complicate
Yeah.
everything with these shoals. We look at the historic erosion rates, which includes, storm events and things, and we can select the interval that we're looking at to establish those rates. And things have changed the last 10 years. So if we're looking at rates from the past 60 years to say what's going to happen to a beach, that might not be the best guess as to what's going to happen the next 10. So, a lot of times we'll look at long-term rates and then we'll look at a shorter-term rate and see how they compare. And, if your beach is all of a sudden eroding, twice as fast as it had been over then you can adjust that calculation and you increase your volume to match that new erosion rate.
And then when we were lucky enough to hear from the individual at North Carolina, one of the things I think that was impressive, at least to me, was the overall plan of knowing that this is a 5-year or 10-year plan, and that within that he definitely addressed inlets as is being prepared. And clearly, if an inlet was doing well, that it could be pushed off or vice versa. But it seemed like they were having a great deal of cost savings as well by being able to plan in the future. So again, it's not only defining what a healthy beach is, but then coming next steps is how do we maintain it over a certain period of time, with flexibility.
weren't they also deploying, they were doing multiple projects because of the deployment cost of trying to get more than one project in a.
Right,
bucket,
which is a
with
great
plan,
reason to be
yeah.
talking to Sullivan's Island is doing that, and then any other area that would similarly be needing to do some dredging as well.
Yeah, the Dare County example is a very good example, but it is a little different than our situation because their beach setup is they have just a contiguous shoreline between several different municipalities. So, if you're out on a boat, you don't know where the line is. So when they're doing a project, literally, they're using the same bar area, they're extending the same pipe. You don't have that adjacent partner that would be doing another dredging project. Sullivan's likely isn't to do an offshore dredging project. So you're a little bit on your own. The ability for you to take advantage of other mobilization efforts would be, if there's work going on at Folly or even in Georgetown area, but there's a dredger that is kind of in this vicinity and you can work with their schedule and be as flexible with your timing so that, they're not having to come from Florida or Texas with the dredge or up in the Northeast. You're a little less, a little less able to kind of coordinate that type of, piggybacking project with your location, but there are strategies to try to, reduce your costs.
Hey, Nicole, I think we're back. Sorry.
No problem. I don't know how much of my response you've heard.
I think we dropped off at hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, you have me at hello. Perfect. I'll repeat it then. So my response was to your question about the Army Corps of Engineers studies and whether or not they take economics into consideration. And the answer is yes. They account for both storm protection benefits, so the economic benefit to providing storm protection, as well as recreation and tourism benefits. More so the former, and more recently they're starting to incorporate tourism. So a comparable or a comp that I was mentioning was the Folly Beach project, where the Army Corps has just reauthorized Folly for another 50 years of the federal project. And that entailed a 3-year, $3 million study that included this economic analysis and other modeling to determine the optimal beach width for Folly Beach. The economics, again, are considered tourism economics, but in the past, that responsibility has largely fallen to the local sponsor or the city or town that's working with the Corps to especially determine the tourism benefits. So the economics that they're looking at are, is the beach wide enough and high enough to protect the community? And then, like I said, now they're incorporating a bit of this tourism benefit. Essentially, is the beach wide enough to accommodate the number of tourists and get everybody's butts on the beach, basically?
So,
So the result for Folly was the Corps recommended a 35 to 50 foot wide berm. So that's the higher part of the beach before it begins to slope down toward the water, and as well as a dune system. So the higher end of that, then, just for an example, would be a dune system with a 50-foot wide beach is what the Army Corps determined a suitable size to provide all of these benefits, including economic benefits to Folly.
And I guess to Stephen's point a minute ago, is that for the whole beach, certain part of it, Nicole?
Yeah, they did. It's variable. So in some areas it's only 35 feet wide, and in other areas it's 50 feet wide, and that's
Gotcha.
depending on kind of the energy levels, the background erosion rate, as Stephen mentioned, along the beach.
Got it. And you said there was a $3 million study, and that was the Army Corps conducted that?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry, Douglas.
That's
They
35 to
may
50
be-
feet below the
They may be
berm.
expensive, but they sure are slow.
She said,
So there's, that would be 30 to 50 foot of dry sand beach seaward of the dune.
seaward of the dune, okay.
And that's a, when you say a 3-year, it took 3 years for them to reach that decision, or it was a looking backward 3-year analysis of revenue and beach data?
Yeah, good question. No, it took them 3 years to do this study, and it's my joke about them being slow. It was a full
They had had to earn their $3 million.
Well, yeah,
Can go and beyond.
you can't spit that stuff out quick.
Per hour,
Yeah.
if you're gonna
Yeah,
charge $3
they,
million.
That amount of money.
They run a model that, looks at a million different storm scenarios, literally a million different storm scenarios. And, with different storms hitting at different tides, hitting at different directions, all that kind of stuff, to use a statistical analysis on what that, should look like.
Was this the first time they'd done something like, that? I mean, 3 years is.
We're trying to grasp this.
I know. What I'm hoping is that if this was the creation of the model, and for who knows why it was 3 years, but now that it's created, perhaps it wouldn't take 3 years.
Well, but Nicole, I guess you've worked with the Army Corps as much, I guess, as Stephen has too. I mean, I think that's they're the only gig in town, so they can do kind of what they, I mean, that's their typical, right?
Of course, yeah, and this is, wasn't just economics, right? It was the
Yeah.
whole thing. It was how to figure out, how to justify federal involvement in a 50-year project at Folly. So with all the rules and regulations they have, the 3-year, $3 million limit is standard for them. And they actually had to put that in place because sometimes it took longer than 3 years to do that type of study.
But they're now
So,
locked in for 50 years.
That's
right.
standard, and a company like Stevens exists because the industry can do it better, faster, and cheaper.
So Nicole, is this publicly available, so it would be informative to the rest of the communities?
Yes, I can share the website.
That would be great.
And they have similar ones for Edisto and Pawleys Island.
The Army Corps done.
Well, and I understand that study is required for a community before they decide to join.
Right,
And
the
if-
Army Corps.
Correct, it's this whole CBA analysis of, that you have to do before they decide whether or not it's worth for them to take over the management of our beach. And I think when we initiated conversations with the Army Corps about having them come here and for us to understand what it would take for the city to have a federally managed beach, I understand that study is the responsibility of the town, the cost of that report. Or maybe a cost share. I know that the town has to put in some money for it.
Yeah, Nicole, do you know, I mean, was that a $3 million to Folly Beach in that example?
Yeah, typically, the studies can cost the local sponsor up to 50%, so up to $1.5 million. Folly is fortunate to have a favorable cost share because of their location downdrift to the Charleston Harbor jetties. And there was some supplemental funding, so their cost share was much less. It was more like 10%.
And is the other half or whatever Army Corps? I mean, they're picking that up? Or who's picking that other
Yeah.
cost up?
Be the Corps.
It'd be the Corps.
Did they freeze?
Sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Who's picking up the other half? I mean, is that the Army Corps? Or 70%, whatever the number is? Yeah.
So typically, the federal government, the Army Corps covers the federal cost, right? So for the case of Folly, the federal government pays 90% and the local pays 10%.
But we could expect half.
But it is
would
not,
they?
it's not uncommon for the Corps to request the local community to pay 50%. And Stephen could comment on what Edisto and Folly's cost shares were, if you know.
Yeah, I think they were 50%, and they've had to be, the original studies were done a long time ago. They've had to be updated and restudied, so that it's
Were
not
those
just been.
two, 3 years, $3 million?
That was before the 3 million. I don't
Yes.
remember how much it was. I know the town of Edisto spent well over $1 million to get their study done with the Corps. Pawleys was originally done in early 2000s. I'm not sure what those numbers were.
But again, Scott, to your point, they're investing 3 years, 3 million for a 50-year commitment,
Right.
which I guess I kind of get, but
And, yeah, and I think, we've talked about this before, Folly was in kind of a unique situation. And I guess, one of the questions I'd have is what a county like Dare takes it on themselves, we're looking at maybe the possibility of going with the Army Corps. I don't know if there's a combination to be had, but what's the, what's kind of the decision cycle that tells somebody to do it on their own versus go with the Army Corps?
So in the case of Dare County, I'm not sure if Mr. Alton spoke to this or not, but they had an approved project for, I want to say close to 20 years, and and the Corps said it was going to be $1 billion project. And it was never going to be funded. So they took it upon themselves to say they've got to protect their beach.
So they tried it and got no, is really what.
Well,
you're
they
saying.
got approved.
Yeah,
The-
for
the-
$1 billion though.
You can come up with
Yeah,
$1 billion.
but it was never at that point, it was never going to be appropriated. So you can have an approved project, and the same case was Polly's, excuse me. Polly's was approved in 2004, and up until 2018, never had funds actually appropriated for it. So you're at the risk of the federal government to actually dedicate funds to it. Now, the past couple of years with all the hurricanes and the way the government's spending money, there's been plenty of money for the Corps to implement these projects. So they've been doing a lot more. They came back to Polly's and said, now we have funds right after, they said, I won't go into all the details of Polly because it's a long story, but the town elected to do their own project. They were about to award it, and the Corps said, literally 3 days before they were going to award it, that now we have money. So they waited a year to try to let the Corps get their project in place, realized it wasn't going to happen soon. So they went back and did their own project
After waiting in a year, wow.
after waiting a year because they had to get easements. They were having some issues with that. So they're still waiting for the Corps to implement their project, which is maybe next year.
So did DARE kind of go through both channels at the same time to make sure that they had a plan A, plan B contingency, or did they wait?
It
till-
took a little while, but yeah, they started working in the mid-2000s to get a permit on their own. It took them 4 years to get a permit because they had to do the dredging in the summertime and then get all the tax plan funded. So it took a couple of iterations of votes to get the funding mechanism put in place. In 2011 was the first project done up there.
Okay, thank you.
And Stephen, in that example, if you are approved for a federal project, but then you kind of shift gears and do it locally, do you then fall off the radar of the, I mean, can you kind of do both? Could you?
I don't want to speak to the Corps, but so far it seems like you can do both. Again, because the Corps' funding is a little bit suspect sometimes, or uncertain is a better word. So yeah, that doesn't prevent you from doing anything unless if you propose to move material out of their bar area they've selected. But there's ways to work out arrangements with the Corps to get all that done. It just takes time. But you can basically locally sponsor a Corps project too.
Hey, Andrew, I'm just going to pause for a second. Question from your side. You good? Okay. Go ahead, Desiree.
So,
I was
go
just-
ahead.
Oh, no.
No, all I was going to point out is the obvious, then, is that if we were to decide to go with the Corps after meeting with the Corps, we could be, even in the best scenario, it still appears to be years before they would actually, okay, that's knowledge that's new for me,
Yeah.
so that's good to know. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Elizabeth.
And
Not good
well,
news, but good to know.
Might push us to a parallel path.
I will also
Yeah,
mention
correct,
that the Corps project, I don't believe would qualify around the Wild Dunes area.
Right.
So it says private, so anything north of,
Yeah, we're still talking 50.
the southern end of the Grand Pavilion area is outside of what they would be able to do.
Unless,
Good
like
point.
we talked about earlier, and nobody panic, but, there are some private communities who have determined recently that it might be in their best interest to allow some public access within their community to get some stretches of their
do
beach
the
covered.
funding, yeah.
So, there's 2 or 3 now that are kind of kicking it around. It's just
Certainly an
Where is
option.
that, Elizabeth? I'm just curious. Do you know?
well,
Do you know?
Well, there's a couple of people we've been in contact with that have asked that kind of question, that if we opened our gate or if we added access to certain areas, how would that impact state funding? And that would also apply to the federal funding as well. I believe that, Nicole, tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm not sure if the Corps' definition of public access is different than the state's. I don't know that I've seen anything like that, but I would.
Yeah, it's the same, it's the
Okay.
same.
So it'd be a quarter, half mile. in,
Yeah, it
whatever.
depends on how many parking
Yes.
spaces you have that particular access on how
facilities.
far of a
Yeah.
beach it goes. Or
So Nicole, you're wearing a lot of hats in this meeting for us, and one of them is Sullivan's Island and their policy towards beach renourishment, because one of the things we learned from Dare County is they kind of cobble together various municipalities that we've now learned are all, I didn't realize that, I kind of thought they were all little islands on their own, but now are a contiguous stretch. But what's Sullivan's philosophy as to beach renourishment? I mean, don't think you really need much of it, but could you speak a little bit to that, please? Just so we have some idea whether we have a partner in these endeavors or if it's something we should just move on from?
Sure, yeah. So as you know, Sullivan's, along most of their island has the opposite problem, too much sand, and they struggle with some of the management challenges related to that. However, on both ends of the island, on the inlet shorelines, they do have chronic erosion issues that have existed for decades. That's largely been addressed with the structures, the short jetty type things that are called groins. And the town has not gone down the road of any type of long-term beach nourishment plan. They've invested a little bit of funding in monitoring the beach, but again, that's more to understand the dynamics of the bypassing bar and to understand kind of when that sand is going to come around the inlet and feed their beach again. So the homeowners have been on their own to bring in sand if that's what they'd like to do, and several homeowners have done that and built dunes. And this project with the beneficial use of sediment from the dredged from the confined disposal areas that the Army Corps has just awarded is their first endeavor in anything related to beach nourishment. So without having a formal position from the town as their consultant, that it's not really on their radar, right? They're looking for opportunities and they're looking to leverage sediment when it becomes available, but it's not a high priority for them thus far.
This kind of goes along maybe, and it might not be a question for you, it might be more for Stephen, but there's been a lot of talk about Breach Inlet and the sand, and you can see there's a huge amount of sand out in the middle of Breach Inlet right now. Is that something that Sullivan's is monitoring? Is that something where they're waiting for the sand to come to Sullivan's? If we were to be able to go out there and collect that sand and bring it to Isle of Palms, would that be something that Sullivan's would be opposed to? Or if they're experiencing too much sand, if they'd be for it? I mean, these are questions that we need
Right.
answers to, I think, at some point.
Yeah, so right now the mayor and the town administrator, who y'all know, Andy Banky and Mayor O'Neill, are just curious about how dredging might affect them, right? That we would need to do some studies, would need to understand what the impact would be on the bypassing bar, because that is their sediment source. However, Stephen and I have started working together, recognizing the need for regional sediment management between your two communities. So we've been kind of doing this now for a couple years, and Stephen's company is collecting data across the inlet now, so for Sullivan's and Isle of Palms. So he has the information to be able to answer those questions from a technical perspective, and I also believe design the project such that it could benefit Sullivan's. In other words, encourage the bar to bypass like they do at Captain Sam's Inlet, and also, place some sand on those erosional properties if desired along Breach Inlet. So they're not opposed to it. They're willing to have the conversation, but of course, they're not going to just say, "Great, go dredge the inlet." They want it to be a collaboration and a lot of information sharing.
So is that something that you would could facilitate, or I guess I'm wondering, do we just call them up and ask them to come to a meeting? What's the best way of getting that ball rolling?
Sure. Yeah, we see this as the first step in the conversation. So between myself, Andy, and the mayor, we'd be happy to come to future meetings and continue the conversation. So you can consider me a liaison for that. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
So Nicole, one question for you and then one follow-up again regarding the Breach Inlet. Have you found the groins to be helpful? I mean, what is your feeling on those with the experience that you've had on Sullivan's, in other words?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they've anchored the shoreline, they've protected the homes. Groins don't create sand, obviously, so it is necessary to get sediment into those cells from time to time, but without those structures that those houses would be in far more peril than they are today.
Yes, I know Stephen has brought those up as a possibility before. And then a question for the bigger group that I have to admit, I'm still getting confused on this, so very simple. Have we applied for the permit to dredge yet? For dredging, I mean, are we starting that process since it takes a while? I know we need to get this done and get an idea of where we're going and how we fund it, but that seems to be something that's on a lot of people's mind, and I'm not sure that I thought we had via something you said at one point, but then I got the point maybe we haven't.
Can you maybe speak? I know we're working on many
Yeah, that's why I don't know if that one has
projects,
been
and the dredging of
started
the
yet.
inlet, as Katie mentioned, it's not, it's not a project that has been articulated, partly due because of the concerns that there are with what that means for Sullivan's.
Yeah, so just a real quick recap. We have submitted the application to supplement the core project by moving sand up into the dune and moving sand further south. That's been submitted. The project to do the shoal management up at the east end should be submitted next week. So those are the two very short-term things. And that shoal management project at the east end would be designed to alleviate the small area of erosion around Beechwood until the shoal attaches, and then buys us time until the next big project would have to be put in place. And allows some flexibility that should the area kind of around Ocean Club at the very east end start getting bad, we can place sand around that area as well. The other thing we're working on right now is doing a sand search and some of the environmental work for the next large-scale nourishment project. It's kind of the first preliminary step to putting in that permit application, but we've had a lot of talks with SHPO on the shipwreck, so we're actually out there today in the boat doing some of that field work. Nothing has been done yet to date for dredging the breach inlet. If that was going to be pursued, there's a lot of things that would have to be accomplished before submitting the permit application. The permit application really is after most of the engineering is done, so that you know where you would want to place the channel, the depths that you would want to place, the width, and you've done enough analysis of the potential impacts and benefits that justifies the project. So that hasn't been really looked at yet.
Steve, there was one more effort that's been talked about, or I've read about, and I guess some documentation about it. This thought about taking sand in the 40s and moving it.
That would be part of the shoal management.
That's the shoal management for Beechwood.
For the eastern end.
The sand for that area would come from the 40s.
So there's kind of two options with that plan. If the shoal's attached, we would rather use that sand, because we can get out there and we're basically working with nature just to speed it up in the attachment process. But if by next fall, when we would want to do this project, that shoal's still not attached, then we would want to harvest sand from that highly accretional area between 44th and 53rd. And we can go into all the numbers on why we feel like that's a reasonable plan with as much beach as built out down there recently.
And you talked about the major beach renourishment. What are you envisioning? Where does the sand potentially come from? I know you're searching for it. Where does that beach renourishment occur? Is that occurring back up on the north end again to come back south, or how does that? What are you envisioning there?
I'm envisioning a flexible plan where we would have certainly the area at the north end, anywhere up there as an eligible fill site, but also the area south of the pier would be another potential placement site. Knowing that a permit would be good for at least 5 years, depending on when we want to actually pull the trigger for that project, we could fine tune, you would fine tune the construction work, it would be a reduced scope from what the permit would allow, or at least up to the maximum the permit would allow. So we would say permit, at the east end right now, I'd probably say we'll ask for a permit for 2 million yards of sand, knowing that I don't think we'll need anywhere close to that, but want to have the flexibility should we have, some huge event up there. Same thing at the south end, placement along an area beyond what we think we would need, and always can scale down. You can't scale up a permit once it's submitted without
How long do
modification.
those normally take to get approval?
About a year, maybe a little less, now that we've kind of gone through this a couple of times with that from the time you submit it. Again, right now, we probably have a couple more months of just geotechnical work and survey work before we're ready to start drawing boxes on where the sand would be. We were really trying to find an area at the south end that would be a more economical place to harvest sand from the offshore area.
So if that shoal management one goes in next week, it's gonna, we can, I mean, for expectation for our residents.
No,
that-
the
that's a
shoal
quick-
management,
That's
I'm
much quicker, yeah.
Yeah, I'm anticipating we'd be able to have that by the fall or winter of this upcoming year.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Stephen, can you speak to the permitting efforts that on the inlet here about harvesting sand from what we call the spit?
Right, that was something we thought about including in this shoal management permit was, okay, we'll do the same thing down at the south end. But knowing that all the kind of concern and focus that's been on that south end right now, we felt like if we want to have that, it would be better to separate those two permits out. I mean, essentially, it's the same biological assessment. It's a lot of the same work, but we would want to separate them so that any, political or issues going on with the south end would be separate from things on the east end, so it wouldn't delay that. There's not a whole lot of sand on that spit that's available to harvest, where we would feel like if we harvested it, we're not gonna have the potential to create some, downdrift effects to some of those other properties. So that's something that would have to be done in a way where we would have certain thresholds to make sure that we have thresholds on the east end as well. We don't dig within 400 feet of a house. We have at least that much of a buffer. So we'd have to have the same thing on the south end. So even if we went to permit that right now, the conditions may not allow for removal of sand off the spit and recycling it back to the north.
And another question I think Scott had at our last meeting is, and I think we've asked you this before when you presented to council, this Army Corps of Engineers coming in, bringing 500,000 cubic yards of sand, which is more than the area south of the pier has lost in the last 10 years. What is the expectation for people? I know that it's an experiment. I know, we can't really fully predict, but we've had conversations about what people can expect and that volume of sand and the impact that it's going to have down the south end of the island. Could you speak a little bit about?
Yeah, and, this is an educated guess, and Nicole, please, add in if you have any other thoughts, but, we've measured a little over 300,000 yards of sand has been lost in that area south of the pier since 2009. So they're placing 500,000 or up to 500,000 yards. I would say, assume that we may lose 20% of that material just from the finer sand that may get kind of washed around and not stay on the beach where they're placing it. That still leaves us close to 400,000 yards of sand that's going to be in that area over the period of the next couple of months. That's a huge amount, and I really feel pretty optimistic on what that's going to do for that entire stretch of beach, from the pier all the way to, or from 10th Avenue, all the way to the very tip of the island. I know we've had a lot of erosion there the past 2 years, but the prior decades before that, that whole end's been very stable, very accretional. And being out there yesterday, it looks like we're in a more favorable position right now than we have been in the past several months. We're saying, looks like it's coming up on the beach. We were able to withstand this big tide on Saturday without it even getting to the dune north of 3rd Avenue. We're still seeing some erosion right at the very southern tip of the island. But overall, it's holding up much better now than it was, 3 or 4 months ago. So I feel like we're getting through this erosional stage that we were in for the past, 12 to 18 months. But there's certainly no guarantees. But I do feel like this core project, the material, even if we didn't touch the material as they place it, within the next couple of months of placement, it's going to migrate up the beach. It's going to start restoring the dune. I imagine it's going to extend the dry sand beach out at least 50 feet, if not more, in a lot of areas. So it's going to be a very substantial project down there.
That would be great. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it sounds like it's back to the kind of 35, 50, the Folly targeted optimal beach or something.
But I would point out, as regards that tip, as you said, I mean, this past storm, I saw damage on Sullivan's I've never seen before at Breach Inlet. They lost sand too, as did our home. I saw that tip really got bad. Yeah, very close. The walkways are gone now. So again, I just want to be mindful. Clearly, this is an area we've got to watch, and I'm just concerned if we need to get this, we need to work together towards a plan to present to the council. But I do feel that this may be something we we need to really keep our eye on, because that doesn't appear to be getting better. And as you said, it may be a place we can harvest too, sand from. So I mean, there's a dual, but I did get concerned looking at how it was new damage on the very tip.
I was telling Doug the other day that there's a lot of different erosional kind of cycles that all add up. It's like the tide. You have the tide from the moon, you have the tide from the suns, you can get a little tide from Jupiter, and the way those waves interact, sometimes it's, higher or lower. We've seen an erosional wave that you get your week to week kind of ridges and runnels that may cause some little erosion, but there's been an erosional wave over the past 12 months that's kind of worked its way from 4th Avenue down to 3rd, down to 2nd, and now that's right at the very tip. So it's like that wave has moved through the system while we've had some shorter term fluctuations going on as well. So that's what's got me a little bit more optimistic that as soon as it gets all the way off, now we're going to be, in a little bit better position.
Because we are seeing, I think the last time we were out there, seeing some growth, some of the escarpment north of Third, it's starting to see some growth. And we've been seeing that kind of moving down in the past couple of weeks, which is a really good sign.
Hey, Nicole, do you mind just giving an opinion too on the Army Corps project, kind of to Scott's original question, just from your view from Sullivan's?
Remind me the original question, will it help?
Yeah, will it help? What's the effect? What do we expect? Or really, I guess, Desiree, your question, what's the expectation from a resident / municipality standpoint?
Right, yeah, I concur with what Stephen mentioned. Ideally, best case scenario, we were able to achieve that beach width that we've discussed, maybe a 50-foot wide beach maximum. I think that's the hope and dream for everyone here, but we need to keep our expectations tempered. I wouldn't broadcast that information to the public until we have a better understanding of what this is.
You just did.
Nicole?
Thank you. Yep. Elizabeth.
So I'm going to skip backwards about 8 minutes, I think, with the question about the large-scale renourishment permit that you're beginning to work on. We have stretches identified, or previously we did in our last thing, and one of those stretches was the south end. It was just that we didn't need, at that point, sand or volume in that stretch. So, I mean, are we reviving those same stretches, the 3, I think it was, and those are kind of our windows, and then you start looking at volume from last time forward?
Yeah, it's, we try not to overcomplicate it. It's, if we think we may need sand somewhere, we'll include it in the permit application, and we'll include a volume higher than what we would think we would need. And then knowing that these things come and go, and our time is a little uncertain on when we would implement it, you keep monitoring it, and then when it's, either the financial piece works out or the beach condition warrants it, you set your final volume based off of that. And also bid prices. We always include a base bid, which is a minimum volume we want, but then an alternate based off of what the cost actually is to meet our budget. So we'll add in as much as we can on that.
Ask one more question. I hope and dream, and 50 feet would be fantastic, but just in the event that this experiment doesn't pan out as expected, is our plan B recourse that we've got to wait the year for the major beach renourishment, and then we got to just kind of figure out a way to hold the line in the meantime? What would be, and I'm just kind of voicing concerns from residents, and I hope it's going to happen, and it sounds like it's got a really good chance of happening. What is our recourse in the event that it doesn't quite pan out as expected?
Yeah, again, I'll just say that the sand that they're adding, there's only so many places it can go. So even if it doesn't come up the beach and restore a dry sand beach over time, they're going to be placing it around the low tide line or the middle part of the beach. That's going to be visible very quickly, and you're going to see that there. So it's going to be in the system. Now, some of it may start shifting south very quickly and just kind of go out into the shoals of the inlet, but from what we've seen in the past, it's got to build up the beach first. It's got to move kind of up and then down. So I'm expecting to see a lot of accretion. If it doesn't, then our recourse is work towards this larger offshore project, or, if, again, the sand, it's got to go down towards the spit before it can go out in the inlet. So it should build that up, and that might be a source that we can use on a smaller scale, maybe 40,000, 50,000 yards to recycle back up to some of those areas. But really, the large-scale offshore project is the only other viable option there.
And that permit's in the queue, or it's coming in the queue, or it's, I mean, I'm just wondering when that clock starts.
Couple of
ticking.
months off. sounds
Yeah, I think
like.
a couple of months.
Thank you.
The Dare County executive said that they hired somebody to expedite the permitting process down from what you were saying, 5 years to, 18 months? Is that something that we should look into to get the projects moving along a little quicker?
Yeah, they had a very significant problem with doing summertime dredging. It's required because of the wave conditions up there. A dredger just can't work in the winter. It's so energetic. And being I don't know if he had to hire that the first go around or if if they're still lobbying for those kind of things, but it's gone a lot quicker. I mean, we were able to, I think our last permit that we got for a part of Dare County was less than 12 months from start to finish. So I don't think it's something y'all need to do. I don't think there's that much controversy over the offshore projects here. This potential to dredge Breach Inlet would be a longer permit process. It would require a decent amount of modeling, some back and forth with the Sullivan's folks to make sure we are all on the same page. And any work around an inlet is going to be reviewed as more sensitive because they are a little bit more sensitive to habitat for shorebirds and for nursery fish and things like that.
It's good, Elizabeth.
You mentioned earlier that you'd contemplated the shoal management permit to, I think this is what you said, would be the north and the south end, but then you peeled off the south so as not to slow down or derail the north end. Should we begin to pursue a south end shoal management? And in doing that, are we obligated to kind of wait for this Army Corps thing to come? I mean, how do you calculate volume that you need if
Yeah.
you're getting 500,000 and you're not sure where it's going to go or what it's going to do? I mean, is that, and how much does that permit cost?
Let's see. I understand the sensitivity down there right now, but I would, with this project likely starting in April or shortly thereafter, I would say let's wait and kind of see at least how it's starting to look. I mean, we should know within the first couple of weeks how the sand's going to start looking on the beach. Is it starting to move up the profile? Is it moving south? Is it just they're pumping and we don't see any? But then after that, if it looks like it's coming up the beach, I want the city to have as many tools in your toolbox as possible. What can we do to respond to any erosion situation as cost effectively and as quickly as we can? So that includes, having shoal management projects or sand recycling projects just kind of on hand, ready to go if the conditions allow and, the need arises. So I would say, yeah, let's have something for that area. I'd still say wait till the core project just to maybe give us a little bit better guidance. But you got to have enough triggers and thresholds to protect all properties. We don't want to impact one property because we're helping somebody else. And I think that can be done.
Stephen, would you include as part of the larger permit for the offshore dredging, both on the south and the north, this idea of a groin? I know that the groin, it's completely different permitting process. You have to show the erosion rate and do it in coordination with a nourishment project. So would that be our opportunity if we're looking at a larger scale offshore dredging project soon, depending on how this Army Corps project performs? Should we incorporate an analysis for the potential of installing a groin down there?
Yeah, so a terminal groin is essentially like any other groin. It's just placed at the end of an island to kind of anchor that down coast end of it. We built one in 2013 at Folly Beach County Park, and it's worked really well there. And it's needed in areas where you've seen just chronic, constant erosion. They've done several projects down there that wash away within a year or two. I mean, they were losing 50, 60, 70 feet of beach a year. So if the erosion going on at Breach was to continue like it is, then we would say, yeah, groin is probably a worthwhile investment and maybe a better option than doing the Breach dredging because you would know a little bit better what you're going to get out of it. And it can be included in one permit. If you build a groin, you have to nourish it as well. You have to fill it up, basically, so that you're not trapping sand that would otherwise be moving down coast. So you can include that with a nourishment project, but if you get, appealed or, you know, the groups like Coastal Conservation League or environmental groups may not agree that a groin is a good solution. They could appeal that permit, and so it may be better to separate them out, where you have the nourishment permit and then you have a separate groin permit that would be built in conjunction with that. But that's a strategy you would want to look at, you know, talk to folks, trying to get everybody on the same page and figure out your plan forward.
And would that be something that Sullivan's would have to be okay with? We have to show that
Yeah,
the
you would-
groin's not going to negatively
you would
impact them?
Certainly want to do that.
So where's the closest groin to that? We have groins, don't we?
There are some groins buried up at the eastern end of the island.
I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right, is to put them out there and then they end up buried? Or
Right,
is
and
it-
so
yeah.
the theory behind the one, you know, if we put one at breach, would be put it in a position where it would be exposed and effective when you are in an erosional cycle. But if we do have this, you know, it starts accreting like it has historically done, essentially it would bury itself. And there are examples where terminal groins are buried, you know, on the coast. There's one at Hunting Island at their north end. There was one at Devido for a long time that was buried. So there are examples where that happens.
Yeah, we have two at 41st, I think, or in that area, and then up by the Citadel Beach House.
Yeah, there's actually a seawall buried under the Citadel House.
Stephen, this idea, and kind of to go back to Breach Inlet and dredging out of Breach Inlet, is the only reason the city would do that to gain the sand from the area? Or is there some, you know, we kind of hear that the inlet's clogged, is there some flow that could also be benefited from that? Or is it solely just a place to get sand from that's close and accessible?
Yeah, I've heard that that term, kind of the inlet's clogged. The inlet's not shoaling and clogging. It's not like the inlet's choking itself off where water's not able to flow through. The water will maintain a cross-section through that inlet regardless of any effort to try to block that off. I mean, if we manually try to build a dike across it, first time you have one little pinhole, it would widen itself back out to its natural width and depth. Now, the shoals are constantly shifting. You know, if you pull up this Google time-lapse animation that I think I've shown before, it just looks like a river of water, but it's sand that's just constantly flowing to Sullivan's Island. So depending on where that channel is, it can have an impact on your shoreline at Breach, because if the channel's flip closer to Isle of Palms, it can kind of back up sand for a little bit, but as it kind of draws away, it can draw some of that sand along to it. And there's also some other little channels that form and that can impact the beach. So it's a very, very dynamic system, but it's not clogging it up. It's not impacting the water levels behind it on either side. Our inlets are ebb dominant, meaning all the sand's on the seaward side, as opposed to North Carolina. They're dredging their inlets a lot because all the sand accumulates in the landward part of the inlet where people are trying to navigate their shallow draft vessels. So they're having to dredge those out constantly to try to allow the folks to use those waterways. So it's a little bit different system up there. So you would definitely gain the benefit of sand if you dredged a new channel. Some of that sand would need to go to Sullivan's Island to offset some potential impacts of, you know, manipulating the system there. So if we were to dredge, you know, 400,000 yards out of there, 100,000 may need to go there to Sullivan's. That's something we'd have to kind of look at. But you're not, I don't think there's like a hydrologic impact that project would do as far as, you know, restructuring the inlet, other than, again, kind of manually shifting the shoals a little further north. But that's a process that kind of happens naturally every several years anyway, and should be happening again fairly soon.
So you're just talking about dredging it, it's not a channel realignment?
It would be a channel realignment. You would be dredging a new channel through some part of that northern shoal. So yes, you would be realigning it, but it's a different, the southern end of the channel being fixed by Breach Inlet, it's a little bit different project than what we do like at Captain Sam's Inlet, where that inlet migrates 200 feet to the south every year. So every 10 to 15 years, we have to move that inlet 2,000 to 3,000 feet back to the north. There's similar inlets in North Carolina that they migrate, you know, several hundred feet a year, so you flip it back to the north. That's more of a channel realignment permit that addresses erosion concerns, as opposed to this project, which would be a little bit more analogous to a navigation type project, where you're just trying to deepen a channel to allow boats to go through. Nicole, do you got any thoughts on that?
Not really. The channel realignment is often used to benefit the downdrift beach, and like the Captain Sam's scenario, where so I would say that this would be a lot more of a hybrid as compared to that. And yeah, I agree that the hydrodynamics aren't really the goal here. The flow is that breach inlet is not clogging. So yeah, I agree with Stephen's remarks there.
So if we were to, I mean, it sounds like if we were to be going for the sand there, you would still be using like an ocean-going
Right, so
dredge, or could you do that with kind of the type equipment that we've had on the beach, or something less than that or different than that, or what would the?
yeah, to do a channel realignment or dredge the inlet, you would have to use an ocean certified dredge because it's seaward of the coal regs line, which is at Breach Inlet Bridge. That line the Coast Guard uses to designate what ships are allowed, or what vessels are allowed to operate. So anything seaward of there has to be ocean certified, which means it's a pretty large dredging vessel. There aren't a lot of small ocean certified dredges. So you're looking at, if it was an independent project, you're looking at a several $1 million mobilization charge just to get the dredge to that inlet. In my opinion, if you're paying for that, you're probably better off using an offshore source that you're adding sand to your system rather than just recycling some sand around it. So, that creek or the channel dredging, you're recycling sand. You're not increasing your total volume. Offshore, you're increasing your total volume. It's probably more expensive because you're pumping it from further away, but it's going to be fairly comparable.
And that's the path that we're on.
The offshore project's the path we're on. Yeah.
Cindy, do you have a sense? I mean, when you I just kind of hear about clogging inlets, or do you have a sense of the residents' perception as to what the need is and what the problem is at the inlet, and if?
Well, I can't speak I'm not gonna pretend that I'm the ear of everyone. I'm not a council member, and I'm not pretending to be one. So, but I do know that there is a large concern that we're seeing a different flow of water going towards the inlet. We are seeing, and again, perception, we're seeing a whole lot more sand in that inlet. We're seeing boats having trouble navigating, smaller boats having trouble navigating, where that was never, that was a zoom through. But the people who are closer to the inlet have a better, finger on the pulse, and they are noticing a huge change. I mean, I've described to you all that when we've had these high tides, that we're seeing the waves come towards our home. At the same time, they're fighting almost a river channel flowing towards the inlet, which we had never seen. Never is not like a forever term, but over the last 3 years for myself, we had not seen that sort of activity in the ocean.
So kind of a draw
Towards
along the shoreline into the inlet.
At a different pace than we've seen before, and with it came a lot of the erosion during those after those storms, because we're not only getting these high tides, but then during the lower tides, we are seeing a rush of water go towards the inlet. Go ahead, Scott. I can see you've got something to
Is it a question
add.
where the word clog would imply that the water's not getting in or coming out of the inlet, that it's being clogged up? And I think what I'm hearing, and Cindy, what you're describing is that it's not necessarily that the water's clogged up, it's that the direction has changed and the flow has changed.
Flow
which
is
causing
changing.
the
But I'm
erosion.
guessing
And I
that's
think
not a
that goes to your
surprise.
channel redirection
Yeah.
that you're talking about.
And-
So I don't
and-
think it's a volume in or out. I think it's a directional issue.
Yeah, and I was out there yesterday surveying it and noticed there's this thing called a marginal flood channel, which kind of parallels the beach. So it comes out of the inlet and then cuts landward of the big part of the shoal. And so that channel we see come and go from year to year. Sometimes it's deeper, sometimes it's closer to the beach. And yesterday, even though it was very calm, there wasn't a lot of winds, you could see, or not a lot of waves. I could see the current, and then when you have a little wave hitting a current, that wave stands up. That's a common interaction. I could see that happening right there at the south end of the island. What I feel like is happening, and looking at some aerial image, we're in the beginning stages of this natural avulsion where the main channel is deflected towards Sullivan's Island and kind of hugs their beach. It looks like a new channel is forming much further to the north, and it's a very broad channel. There's a couple of breaks in the shoal, but what's going to happen is that channel is going to widen and become the new dominant channel, and that's going to make this next big shoal bypass event over to Sullivan's happen. So that's the natural process that's occurring, and we're just in a portion of that stage where you're seeing these changes. So yeah,
So would blocking a marginal flood, so it sounds like what I'm hearing Cindy describe is this flow to the back of the island through what I think you're describing as a marginal flood channel. I mean, can those be blocked when they form? Is that what's going on? I mean, is that?
It's just part of the natural inlet cycle. I mean, you could go in and dredge a new marginal flood channel and fill in the old one and manually shift it. It may be there for a couple of months and go back to where it wants to be naturally. There's very little that you can do. There's nothing permanent you can do around an inlet. We can try to dredge channels and manipulate shoals some, but it's a expensive and difficult project logistically to try to get equipment in there to do that type of thing.
Would this situation have any, I've heard some residents, I think, the Davids, like Hamlin Creek, they're saying it lower than it's ever been before and then higher than it's ever been before. And it's that, I don't know if it's the timing of the flow, volume of the flow. I mean, does that have anything to do with what's going on at the inlet? They live right around it. They're on the 700 block on the backside.
Okay. I don't know. I'd have to look kind of at the specifics of that. You may have a natural sand sill that may have formed on part of a creek that may truncate the tide back in there, but not likely.
Not sure. No.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this. We need to wrap up. Sounds like next, maybe a conversation with Sullivan's Island.
Yeah.
To Nicole's comment, I guess we can get Mayor O'Neill and Andy to see if they can join us in upcoming meetings at committee. I see head nods. Okay.
And I think back to the original theme of trying to articulate what the healthy beach looks for Isle of Palms. Is that something that, with the information that we already have of, 17 years or however long we've been monitoring the island, that's something that you can help articulate for us?
Yeah, we can do that. And what I'd like to do is we'll establish a line, and it'll get a little bit difficult at the center of the island because it's so wide there that the structure line, we don't have data between, so far in the dune and those Haxville houses. We'll have to incorporate some LiDAR data or come up with just assume that it's flat between where our surveys stop in those lands. But the numbers are going to be very big up there on what the existing volume is. But what I would like to present is maybe a couple of places on the island where people are familiar enough with to say, yeah, we're happy with this. It withstood, Matthew and Irma. We feel like it's got a healthy beach, but what we would run is, so we'll pick that volume, we'll pick some brackets higher and lower than that, and then you can run a cost analysis to see what does it cost to maintain each one of those, and it's significant, difference between them.
So we're talking about developing an ideal, I think
Yeah,
you called it the ideal beach profile for the Isle of Palms.
I don't think we need to spend $3 million
No, that's
for
not.
this.
No,
That's a whole different animal.
We'll do it for 2.5 and 1 year.
appreciate the deal.
They did it
So
next time.
with that, just,
Bar high.
oh, sorry, Katie.
No, I'm just,
No, you're good. I just didn't want to interrupt. All I was going to say is, just following up what Desiree said, is that I think that what would be good at possibly the next meeting then is, in addition to what you've asked for, which I wholly agree with, is just a little bit of time to then say, okay, what do we need in a plan? And is it something that we can ask for? Does it go to the council to say, okay, what we'd like but we can give a recommendation. We think we need a long-term plan that creates,
Ideal beach profile.
a beach profile that will be chosen based on, what's feasible, reasonable, aspirational. We'd have to, and then present that, because obviously there'll be some fees, and I don't know that we have, I think right. I just want to kind of set those goals, because the sooner I think we can define that and get input and education, then I think we'll be best in a position then to decide, okay, now what are our steps to do that? And then we can start looking at these various permits. But it sounds like, given what I learned today, many of these permits take a long time. So the sooner we can kind of start this project. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not looking for the 3 million, I'm just, what can we do to do it in an educated and informed way? And so people can expect that that's what we'll be aspiring for would be great.
And I would say, I mean, the city council engaged CSC last year to start the permitting process for the larger permits. So, and that will address the two hotspots that we have, the north and the south. So I think that overall, we'll look at, the entire beach that right now has, it's not exhibiting any erosional issues, but this could help guide us to, once a trigger comes in, we will be able to identify what that trigger is. And if we need to start working on permitting for other areas other than the north and the south, which are our problems now, then we can do that.
And I would hope we'd get into a cycle, that we
Correct.
literally know that every 3 years we need to start a permit for, and then if we don't need to use it,
Then
or.
we just don't, yeah.
But again, the goal is to keep the price down, but also, there's going to be people who are, we haven't addressed it in this forum, but with the Army Corps coming in this summer, there's going to be a lot of disruption, I would think, in the way that, and we need to start informing people this is, maybe a marketing, we put a plan together, moving forward, we have this is part of our beach renourishment, if we can get forward thinking, but I think to do that, we've got to get something in front of council that they're comfortable with. And that's all. So that's it. I know we're late.
Stephen, what's your best guess for coming back with this ideal beach profile in a couple of sections? Is that weeks, months, given everything else we're asking you to do?
I'd like to have 2 weeks if
Yeah,
possible.
that's
but-
fine. It may take us a couple of weeks to get Sullivan's lined up too, who knows?
Were you talking about the Army Corps next time or something?
Waiting on them to come back to us. I think they had a meeting on the 12th, so this week to, I think, do the final approval. There's a process.
They said end of this month, right?
It was the
Roughly
12th.
The
12th, they had the approval, the committee to look at it,
Okay.
be ready to present. So I hope, I don't know if it'll be next Friday, but, or the end of the month, as a ready point.
the end
Yeah,
of the month it would be ready to come.
The committee on committees
yes,
that will approve the committee.
yeah.
Recommendation from committee.
Yeah.
Final question? No.
Exactly how it
All right, Nicole, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen,
Thank you,
always.
Nicole.
Andrew.
And Andrew. So we are off record at 10:12. Ryan, thank you.
Look at us.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Stephen, thank you for being here.
Thanks,
It
Andrew.
helps
Safe
so
travel.